I've been going down a wormhole on ESPN of old Shay Ralph stories. And I find that the more I learn about her, the more fascinated I am. Shay Ralph is the coach at Vanderbilt. She is somebody who is like really quickly going up the ranks of great coaches that we have in this game. Vandy was like the number 5 seed for a very long time this year, and it is really the only team that I see being able to crack that top 4, like that big power, like there's just like the power imbalance is still there, but Vandy might be able to really crack it. Now, they have a very interesting set of potential matchups. In the Sweet 16, they are going to be facing Notre Dame. And if they win that, they'll be playing UConn, which is also where Shay Ralph played. And she coached under Gino Auriemma for a number of years as well. So, all right, so here's what I've learned about Shay Ralph. There was a time when Shay Ralph was considered the most famous college athlete, most famous female college athlete in America. It was her. She was Sue Bird before Sue Bird, and maybe would have been Sue Bird if she had never gotten hurt. She was the one who, I was reading this ESPN story where she, really values the early hours that she can get into the gym because so much of her day is just kind of like managing the fame of like being the person that young women are aspiring to be like there's so much responsibility on her shoulders at that time. And that is not something that I even knew at all about Shay Ralph. There's also just like some very interesting history with Notre Dame as well. The last game she ever played in a college uniform, actually the last game she ever played, because she ended up getting drafted but didn't end up playing because of her knee injury, was actually against Notre Dame. It's a game that's been written about as one of the best games ever. She was 4 or 5 to start and had 11 points, misses a shot, goes up for her rebound, and tears her ACL for the 5th time. And there's an ESPN story I was reading about it, and it says, Sue Bird hits a game-winning shot, but it says this one isn't for the Big East Championship. This one was for Shay Ralph. Bird says, "She's given so much to me. I wanted to give something back to her," Bird said as she struggled with her emotions. Another fun footnote in that game, UConn freshman Diana Taurasi, the tournament MVP, scored 14 points before fouling out. Never changed, D. This was a star-studded game, and it features a lot of the same characters. Sue Bird, Swin Cash, DT, Shay Ralph, and then you had Neil Ivey, the Notre Dame coach, on the other side of it, who was, doing amazing stuff for Notre Dame. Notre Dame actually beat UConn twice that season for the first time ever. Once in January, and then again in the Final Fours. And Neil Ivey was the point guard on that team, racking up double-digit assists. So a lot of different. There's these are like the blood feuds of women's basketball, right? And I was watching the Pat Summitt documentary, and just sort of like the way that Gino like just didn't want to interact with her at all. And I was like, man, like these guys really did not like each other, And like Neil Ivey, she's a Notre Dame point guard coached by the Notre Dame coach. Like she's Irish all the way through. She's a guard from Guard University, Like she is the prototype. And then like Ralph, it's so interesting. Like she's Vandy, but she's got those scars from Notre Dame, from her time at UConn. It's just I love that we're kind of having this throwback moment right now where the main characters have changed. The main characters are now Michaela Blakes and Hannah Hidalgo and Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd. And the fact that all of them are going to be playing each other is going to be really, really fun, especially Michaela Blakes and Sarah Strong, who have kind of been, neck and neck for the Player of the Year race. The fact that they could potentially be matching up in the Elite 8. Now, I'm sure Hannah Hidalgo has some things to say about that first. But I'm just really excited for this weekend and for the potential return of these matchups and these rivalries being like big ticket college basketball things.
I am mostly bummed out that we have to potentially see Vandy and UConn as relatively early as the Elite Eight that I realized the committee didn't have other choices here because the SEC is so loaded. And if you want to avoid conference matchups early, you had to put Vandy in this UConn bracket and not in one with Texas and South Carolina. But yeah, this could have been such a great Final Four matchup, I think, potentially, because you're right. I do think you have the 4 number 1 seeds. And I really do see Vandy as the only team that can potentially seriously hang with them. And it's a bummer that this is going to, if it happens, be an Elite Eight matchup rather than one that potentially comes further down the line. But yeah, I mean, just all of those storylines you were talking about, this is the best example we have yet of how much the committee loves hitting you over the head with narratives and just really hammering that in. But it is really fun. It's really cool to have all of those intersecting paths there. And I think the biggest one when you're looking at Vandy, UConn, like a lot of really cool, fun on-court stuff to talk about. Like you said, the Blake's strong matchup. Aubrey Galvin, the point guard for Vandy, I think she was SEC Freshman of the Year. It feels weird to call her underrated, but I think so often people look at Vandy and say, this is Michaela Blake's and company. But I think Galvin is legitimately talented. She's adding her to this roster has allowed Blake's to shine a lot more with what she can do off ball. She's such a gifted mover. I think the way she can move off the ball is just like it's a real strength of hers. And the fact that she's not tasked with bringing up the ball and facilitating as much as she was last year really has opened up a lot more here. But apart from all of that on-court stuff, I think the biggest thing is just how long we had this idea with Shay Ralph when she was an assistant at UConn that she was kind of the head coach in waiting, that it seemed very likely for quite a while that when Gino retired, she would potentially be one of the favorites to take over that job. And I think it's hard to leave a situation like that, and it's also very hard, I think, to leave a situation where you are working with the best talent. You are in the Final Four every year, and it's a scandal if you're not. Like, there's a lot of pressure in that environment, but it also comes with really, really huge perks. And to leave and go to a Vanderbilt program that did not look at all like this when she left 5 years ago, a Vanderbilt program that she really had to gradually, slowly build up brick by brick. She's talked a lot about how this was a 6-year plan for her and that she only wanted to leave if she could do things with the time and the resources to do them the way that she felt they should be done, to build a program the way that she had seen a program built at UConn, which you were talking about that history. It's worth considering, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s when she was there, that Gino had been there for a decade. It's not as if he was new, but this was still, UConn won the national championship in 1995 and then doesn't win again for a couple of years because you have Tennessee dominating. Like this was a time where UConn was successful, but UConn was not UConn in the same way. Like, she saw what it took to go from a program that can win one title to a program that can win a ton of titles. And so, it's hard to leave that environment. It's hard to build up gradually, especially, I think, in the current environment. I think it can be hard in a lot of ways to sit down with an AD and say, like, I want to do this over 6 years. Here's how I want to do this. This is, I wrote a feature on Vandy a couple months ago, and, they obviously, Vanderbilt is a private school with a ton of resources, but this is not a school that is like just shoving money at women's basketball. That, she estimated they are outside the top third of NIL spending in the SEC on women's basketball. That, you have resources, you can contend for lots of players, but you are not building a roster by just having a ton of money to throw at every single player who potentially would want to come. That's a hard environment to build slowly, gradually. And they've done it. That, this really, you look year by year. Last year, I think, was an interesting turning point. You saw players leave in the transfer portal. You saw someone like Camille Pierre, who's a great talent, ends up going to NC State. You are losing talent on paper with who's going into the transfer portal. And the fact that they were able to come back so strong and so balanced, and really, I think, just such a better team that is so much more than just Michaela Blake's. I think you really, the other players on this roster kind of get short shrift. That, like, when Sasha Washington is at her best, she can be like a very sturdy, solid post threat. Justine Pissot, when she gets hot, that's a really good option. looking at how much better this team is this year than last year and how much better they were last year than the year before, it really is remarkable. And I think looking at what she's built and how it took years to get there, it coming from an environment that was so different, I think is just really, really interesting and speaks a lot to Shay Ralph's vision and, you know, everything she put into this program.
Yeah, and I think she really struggled with losing at first, right? Like, especially in the stops that she had before going back to UConn and Vanderbilt, right? Like, I think she is just somebody who is such a perfectionist, you know? It's even, like, kind of detailed in the old stories about her where, you know, she would not take a single day off regardless of what it meant for her knee, you know? Like, she's somebody who has, like, dealt with these injuries, and she was kind of preparing for herself for a life of this where like, okay, you win the first title, but that's just the beginning. That was in her mind going to be just the beginning of things. Like then she was going to be off to the WNBA, and she was always going to be sort of, you know, comparing herself to a version of herself that didn't exist yet. And I wonder if, you know, I like, it's just a huge what if. I think it's just one of those like sliding doors moments in the history of women's hoops that like even now has its ramifications too, because like she probably doesn't go and become a coach if she was still playing, and now she has spawned this this UConn East team in, of all places, the state of Tennessee, which is insult to injury for Tennessee fans who are also going through so much right now. As far as like they're simultaneously like that Tennessee fan base is having to revise their expectations to a degree because of what the SEC has become money-wise, but then they're also looking at this team in Vanderbilt that has somehow, for all the excuses you can make for why Tennessee can't get back to the top of the SEC while the SEC is so competitive, there's so much NIL money, you have this team in Vanderbilt who is doing all those things too. And I feel like so much of what they're doing is like this, like it's not intentional, but I think that when you think about Vanderbilt, so much of, I always think about it, it's like this in conversation with, or like this subtweet and everything that's going on in Tennessee is like, even like, I don't know, maybe I'm just so Pat Summitt pilled right now from watching the documentary and thinking about these historic moments, but I think there's a strangeness to the fact that Tennessee is not involved right now. Like they're the odd program out right now. Like you thought it was probably going to be Notre Dame, but Hidalgo was basically like, no, it's not going to be us. We could like we're back in the Sweet 16, which is where we lost last year. And I think she's going to have something to say in this Vandy matchup too. There's absolutely a world in which she shuts down Aubrey Galvin. Michaela Blakes has to play the way that she played last year, putting up these 50 pieces. KK Bransford put some pressure on the rim. Maybe Justine Pissot has a bad shooting night, and I could see a version of this game where Hidalgo just takes it over, makes it really hard for Vanderbilt to get into their offense, and they win. Like I definitely see that version out there, right? And I think that that's something that maybe Tennessee fans were hoping that, okay, like we had a really, really tough SEC. We didn't do well in the tournament, but maybe now we get a blank slate. But they end up losing to a NC State team that in a lot of ways was lab designed to be able to counter the system that Kim Caldwell has brought to Tennessee and has actually doubled down on. I thought it was very interesting that she doubled down on the system after they lost the SEC tournament. Her sort of contention has been the problem with the season came in the moments where they decided to soften things. That's where everything went wrong. But you wrote a story about Kim at the start of the season, and I'm kind of curious, like what it's been like for you to watch all of this play out.
Yeah, you know, I was very skeptical about her system last year. I went to write this story partially because I was so curious about how she came to the system, what it meant to her, how she saw it evolving at a program like Tennessee and not at Marshall or Division II Glenville State, which, like, for people who don't know, the system, I think the biggest thing people look at it when they first watch it is the style of subbing, that you have hockey style subs here where it's often 5 in, 5 out, just because the idea is that you're playing to the point of exhaustion, that you are pressing really, really aggressively, just a constant full court press, and then very high shot volume, taking a lot of threes, really crashing the boards, trying to get as many O boards as you can. and everything kind of flows out of there. That aggressive press, shooting a lot, taking a lot of threes, trying to maximize possessions by trying to generate turnovers, getting offensive boards on the other end, all of that. Which I think like it worked incredibly well for her in D2. I think we only saw 1 year of her in Division I prior to Tennessee at Marshall, and it worked well there. She brought them back to the NCAA tournament for the first time in like 30 years. I think it's a system that can work really well when you are maximizing limited talent. I think when you are trying to win on the margins in the way that you are when you are a mid-major, I'm not sure how you get that to translate for a program like Tennessee. And I think, I don't know, like we did see it work fairly well that first year with players who she hadn't recruited for the system, taking over Kelly Harper's old roster. It did work pretty well that first year. They were in the Sweet 16. They had a very close Sweet 16 game against Texas. They, you know, they beat Connecticut in her first year. This year, I'm not sure how much it was about the system and how much it was about just this seemed from the outside like a locker room that really got lost.
Yeah.
And I think
they've graduated 7 seniors. They brought in a bunch of transfer portal players. They were trying to integrate 5 new freshmen as well.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard in any situation. I think it's also especially hard in a world where you are trying to get everyone into the system, even if they were recruited to play in that system. It's not like a seamless fit. There are lots of small things you have to work on to be able to get it flowing as seamlessly as you ideally would want it to run. And so I think it's one of those things where the system is like a magnifying glass or a funhouse mirror where it's just every little crack, every little flaw, every example of teammates who aren't quite on the same page or people who just feel like they're not operating at 100%. The system just magnifies that and makes it worse. And so I'm not sure the problem itself was her system here, although I do still have my skepticisms about how much you can run this at this level if it can maximize what you're going to be able to get. I'm not totally sure about that, but I don't think it was the culprit here. I think the problem was this was a new group who clearly at some point got lost. It seems like there was a lot of disconnect. That's hard to coach a team through in any scenario, and I think it was especially hard here. And that was a rough January, February, not much in March to watch.
Oh, the program's first ever winless March, right? And Janiyah Parker doesn't play in the final game. She's a transfer portal addition. Now they're starting to lose players out of the transfer portal. I imagine that they will lose more. And I'm very just interested in seeing what year 3 looks like for her. It looks like she will get a third year, and maybe she learned some things from this experience as well, right? Like even like you go back, like watching the Pat doc, like you realize that she was never perfect either, right? And I thought it was interesting that so much of the softer element of who she is was brought to the fore, and I think that that's something that was really. Like that, I was reading her story. I was reminded of those elements of Kim too, like the fact that she was pregnant last year and was so nervous about telling her players because of everything that she had asked them to commit. That now she was going to have to potentially miss some time. There's some interesting historical parallels there too. Like when you think about Kim Caldwell being pregnant and only missing 1 game, and then like the fact that like Pat Summitt's water broke during a recruiting trip and she was on a plane and wouldn't land in Virginia because they lost to them, and like was basically like, I'm having this baby in Tennessee. Like these are both kind of like interesting old school tough women who try to like they balance this like this thing where they exhibit some sort of lack of vulnerability while also having these moments where they show players a lot of vulnerability. Like one of the quotes that's always stuck to me about Pat is that she's like the type of person who will ride you so hard in practice, and then like before she's about to head out after like a really really like tough player meeting where you're like terrified of her, she's like, do I look okay in these shoes? Like, you know, like it's like and like I think they both have a lot of humanity to them. And I think maybe for Kim, it's about like tapping back into that part and like making sure her players know that she cares about them more than she cares about the system. Maybe it's about getting the right people in there as well. Like as much as like Tennessee has lost a lot of its prestige, they have Olivia Edwards coming in, who's the #2 recruit in the country, coming in as a freshman. So it's not like Tennessee is still up there, and like to be able to recruit a player like that, having never been in a situation like that, like like okay, like maybe she does have some game yet. And I just I think I find myself thinking about the difference in eras a lot. Like everything that Kim gets, like she got a lot of flack for saying that the team had a lot of quit in them. And she's obviously very demanding. And maybe sometimes like that rubs players the wrong way. Pat Summitt benched Candace Parker twice. When Michelle Merceniak joined the team and she said that she had a speech impediment, Pat Summitt told her to get over it. Like there are things that she did that you could not do today, that maybe that's fine. And like there's of course it's good that we've had some like changes in our society since the 80s. Other than the fashion, I will say, also going through your book and watching this doc, 80s workwear fashion for women was at its peak then. Like I was just looking at some of these outfits on the coaching staff in your book, and I was like, yo, like, are you a masked lesbian with like the best style ever, or are you just a woman in the 80s going to work?
The shoulder pads
or both.
alone.
I feel like yeah, the shoulder pad, like that Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. To be sure, but oh my gosh, like the fashion was incredible. But yeah, no, it was a different time, and I think that because the program, she was coaching in anonymity through her mistakes. And I don't think any Tennessee coach will ever get the luxury of being able to do that again. And I'm not really an advocate of like just axing coaches after one bad season, especially after everything that she was able to do in her first season. I do find it like a very interesting human story. I think that Kim is pretty attached to her system. One of the most telling quotes was her talking about the interview process, where she says basically like, if you're hiring me, you're hiring me for my system. And if you don't want my system, basically like I'm not the right person for the job. That feels a little bit damning in retrospect. But I do think maybe she's a coach that puts a lot of her like kind of professional value into the system, and maybe she's a little bit attached to it.